Welcome to Channel Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, Sri Lanka's economy has completely collapsed, with the fallout leaving millions of people with limited access to food and fuel. Bhavani Fonseca, a human rights lawyer and senior researcher, will be joining me from Colombo, the Sri Lankan capital, for insight into this unprecedented economic catastrophe. And Rwanda is hosting this year's Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which is an opportunity for President Paul Kagame to boost his status and promote his country to the international community. Hortense Mudenge, the Chief Operations Officer of Rwanda Finance Limited, will be joining me from Kigali for some highlights from the six-day summit. Then later, Greg Swenson, Chair of Republicans Overseas UK, will join me in the studio to talk about new federal legislation seeking to address soaring gun violence in America. But first, let's start the show with a topic that has dominated headlines here in the UK this week: the biggest industrial action in modern history. More than 40,000 rail workers have walked out over job cuts, pay and conditions.
This is making clear that we have got a financial crisis in our system. £2 billion of additional taxpayer money required at the moment. By making clear that we want to talk about it, by secondly being very, very explicit that we think all of our savings could be done through voluntary redundancy. I don't think there's anything inflammatory about that. It's actually about demonstrating there's a way forward that needn't harm our workers. And of course, on the back of that then, we could be offering decent pay rises.
This strike has come about because we found ourselves in this position where we can't afford for our pensions, our terms and conditions, our pay and our numbers to be sacrificed because of any damage to the economy during the pandemic was not caused by us. You know, we worked the same as other people, same as people who worked from home, and we just carried on. It shouldn't be up to us to pay the price with our conditions in the future.
Earlier, I spoke with our business correspondent Simon Pusey for some analysis. Simon, it's been an absolute mess this week for commuters. If you were in the airport, if you were using the tube, or if you were getting on one of the rail lines, what's gone on?
Yeah, so just 1 in 5 trains are running at the moment. There's been 3 days of strikes and then 1 day of tube strikes. The two are slightly different, but it's the trains are the biggest one. That's up and down the country. A lot of train services aren't working, and I guess, like, thank God COVID happened, because a lot of people now can work from home. But before then, it would be a real nightmare. So I think a lot of people have been staying away from the office, which I guess would have been worse a couple of years ago. This is the RMT union. It's not train drivers, it's more like backroom staff, so cleaners, guards, maintenance workers, and they're trying to get a pay rise for them because they say they haven't had a pay rise in 3 years, and inflation is close to 11%, and they're saying it's time for a pay rise. They're asking for 7%. The RMT union wants 7%. They're being offered 2% with 1% to come, so something needs to change there for that to happen. And they're saying that, you know, people are getting richer around the country. You've got bosses who are taking huge salaries and big bonuses, and yet the working class people, and they say Boris Johnson wants a high wage economy, and they're pointing to the fact that these people on average get £26,000 a year, and they're saying that there needs to be a small wage rise to go with inflation. And most people probably say fair enough, but then people's patience gets thin, especially when they disrupt it in terms of if you live outside of a big city, it's quite hard to get to work now, and people do rely on the trains, and 1 in 5 journeys happening at the moment is, you know, not great, and people are obviously worried about that. I'd say from the government's perspective, or from the rail services perspective, COVID has changed how we travel. I think journeys are down by 1/5 now on what they used to be. So the government really has a problem, I think, in the longer term about how they run the railways. It's not making any money. It's always been quite hard to run the railways since they were privatised. It's always been tough to actually make them sort of worthwhile or make them make any money. But now, because people are changing a little bit about how they live and how they work, they're travelling less in terms of going to the office. And obviously you've had 2 years of COVID when people weren't travelling at all. So there's a real sort of deficit there. So I think the government has a bit of a problem here, because I think most people will start to get really annoyed by these strikes and the way it disrupts their lives. But then you can also see from the RMT's perspective, from this union's perspective and their workers, that not having any pay rise for a couple of years with inflation going up as it is, it probably is fair enough to have more than a 2% increase. But people don't really think in those terms. They think about how they're going to get to work, how they're going to go and see family or friends. And with this happening 3 times in 1 week, the government's under pressure to do something. They don't want to get into direct talks with the RMT union because they say that's not their position. But something has to give. Something needs to change. Otherwise, there's going to be more strikes and people will get more and more annoyed.
Yeah, we'll see if it is going to turn into the summer of discontent, as commentators suggest it will be. Thank you, Simon. This week, Rwanda is hosting the 2022 Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. The summit is the first in-person gathering of Commonwealth leaders since the London CHOGM in 2018. This year's theme is delivering a common future, connecting, innovating and transforming. This includes protecting natural resources and increasing trade. Hortense Mudenge is the Chief Operations Officer of Rwanda Finance Limited, and she joins me now from Kigali for more on this week's summit. Hortense Mudenge, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global today. I'm a Pan-Africanist, so this doesn't offend me too much, but I got to say, it appears as if Rwanda has taken the shine off Nigeria over the past couple of years. You are constantly in the international spotlight. Of course, now you're holding a CHOGM this week as well. What is it about the country that's piqued the interest of investors so much over the past couple of years?
Yes, afternoon, Juliana, and thank you for having me on your show. You're absolutely right to note that Rwanda has continued to gain or garner global recognition, and even now more so because we are hosting the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. So it's a great honor, it's a great privilege, and we're very happy to showcase what we are doing. And I believe as to the reason why we have gained so much international attention, I believe it has been due to the tremendous growth and development that our country has achieved over the past couple of years. And it's across different spectrums, whether it is in social development, economic development, now more recently, financial development, actually, with the launch of our Kigali International Financial Center, which will serve as a regional financial service hub. But I think also beyond that, when you look at across the continent, why Rwanda really is standing out, I believe it's due to the strategic initiatives that our country is pioneering on the continent. When you look at the African Continental Free Trade Area, for example, or even the manufacturing of vaccines that will support this COVID recovery. I think really it's because of that initiative to spearhead and also the great leadership that is really going towards spearheading and accelerating development for the country. And I believe that's why investors are now keen and open and looking to our country for that.
Absolutely. I think, to be fair, I think the success is pretty clear. Unless you're an editor of a British tabloid, everybody agrees that Rwanda is doing pretty well at the moment. You mentioned CHOGM, and there are so many different talking points this week, but a major talking point is about youth leadership roles. Are you finding that this objective is important to clients of Rwanda Finance Limited?
Yes, youth is a big topic. It has always been a big topic. And now in CHOGM, I believe the theme is taking charge of our future. So, and youth really, it goes, we look at the majority of the population across the continent, youth constitutes the biggest share. So if you're going to discuss any topic around the future and how we're going to develop towards the future, the youth have to have a seat at the table. They have to be given the opportunity to make decisions and to be equal stakeholders in the development of our economies or the different initiatives we're spearheading. Now at Rwanda Finance, for example, I know that I might be slowly moving from that bracket of the youth, but we really do have a young population and a young, I would say, workforce. Now, more particularly in our company, over 50%, not even 80% are youth, including across different scales, whether in senior management, middle management, all the way to the officers. And this is something that is actually cross-cutting even in the country. You find that there are many young leaders, whether in government or private sector, And I believe if we're talking about how to make how to achieve the vision for the future, the youth definitely have to be given a chance.
I should have been in Kigali this week, but perhaps next time for one of Rwanda Finance Limited's events. Hortense Mudenge, Chief Operations Officer for Rwanda Finance Limited. Thank you so much for your time today. Let's change gears now to focus on the crippling economic crisis impacting Sri Lanka. Earlier this week, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe announced to parliamentarians that the island nation's debt-laden economy has collapsed as it has run out of money to pay for food and fuel. The government is now urgently seeking help from neighbouring India and China and a potential bailout from the International Monetary Fund. For more on this, I'm now being joined by Bhavani Fonseca, a human rights lawyer and senior researcher. She joins me from Colombo, the Sri Lankan capital. Bhavani Fonseca, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I have been following the story of Sri Lanka, the economic turmoil, for a couple of weeks. Well, I was pretty surprised when early this week I got an alert on my phone with a screaming headline from your Prime Minister saying the economy has completely collapsed. Can you please put this into context of just how bad things are on the ground right now?
Well, thank you for having me. And the situation is quite dire in Sri Lanka. It's not just an economic crisis, it's also a political crisis. So we have a multiple crisis on the ground. And as a result, in the last few months, and this is not something new, it's been there for a couple of months, people have faced severe hardships in trying to get essential items. There are long queues to get petrol and diesel. There are long power cuts. And it stems to the fact that Sri Lanka is bankrupt. We don't have sufficient funds. We don't have sufficient foreign currency. And the Prime Minister, who took office on the 12th of May, spoke in Parliament yesterday and said that things are extremely dire. He's been warning this for a couple of weeks now, but yesterday's statement really did make headlines and startle people because we didn't realize how bad it was, but he laid it out yesterday in Parliament.
What more can be done? So the IMF come in, they bail the country out of this issue, but are there more things that need to be addressed so that Sri Lanka doesn't find itself in a financial unprecedented situation again?
So with the IMF, I want to be very clear. Sri Lanka is in discussions for a bailout. Nothing is guaranteed. The IMF is in Colombo at the moment, meeting with the different stakeholders. We don't know much. There's publicly not much information available other than the fact that they are in discussion. And while there is suspicion towards an IMF deal by certain quarters, we are in such a crisis that we don't have much choice. We have to look to every potential avenue to get assistance. But other than the IMF, there are others as well who have been supportive. I would say India is one of the biggest countries that have come through in terms of humanitarian assistance and opening credit lines for fuel and other necessities. So really some have come through. The World Bank has agreed to provide humanitarian assistance. There is a UN humanitarian call now. So there's multiple things that are being explored. But, you know, the economic crisis is such and the suffering is such that really people are getting more and more angry. You know, the unrest is very real. And it also speaks to the fact that politically we have a government where their legitimacy is also questioned. There is a lot of instability in terms of the politics as well. So there is at one level the economic dimension and the human suffering. And in the political level, you have a prime minister who doesn't really have much support other than relying on the president's party. So there's a lot of issues in terms of the politics as well in Sri Lanka that needs to be factored in terms of moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, clearly a multitude of layers there. But as you listed, some of the turmoil the country has gone through in the past. I'm sure Sri Lanka will definitely get through this, but it's really important to get some real analysis of what's going on the ground. So thank you, Bhavani Fonseca, human rights lawyer and senior researcher. Thank you for your time today. Coming up on Channel's Business Global, I'll be joined in the studio by Greg Swenson, Chair of Republicans Overseas UK, about new federal legislation to address soaring gun violence in America. And I'll be speaking with Charlotte Lockhart, the founder and CEO of 4-Day Week Global, about the new employer scheme which seeks to address mental health and productivity among workers. All of this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Oil prices fell by as much as 6% this week as US President Joe Biden stepped up efforts to cut fuel costs for motorists as fears grow over the state of the world's largest economy. Separately, following weeks of fiery negotiations, new federal legislation to address soaring gun violence is expected to be approved by the Senate next week. The new measures will include tougher background checks for gun buyers who are younger than 21. For more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by Greg Swenson, Chair of Republicans Overseas UK and the founding partner of investment firm Brigg McAdam. Greg Swenson, it's always a pleasure to have you in the Channel's Business Global studio. I do want to talk about this new gas tax freeze potential, but before that, let's talk about gun control. Huge story, always a big story. Yep. But of course, after that horrific shooting in Texas, it's been brought to the fore again. So the most significant new gun controls in a generation could be signed into law, I think, as soon as next week. Why is this bill so momentous, and what are your thoughts on it in general?
Yeah, I think it's a very sensible bill, and I think it will really help the situation in terms of these horrific school shootings. So it's not the only legislation we've had in 30 years, but I would agree it is one of the significant moments in terms of gun regulation. And what it does is it focuses on the actual criminals who commit these horrific crimes instead of focusing on legal gun owners exercising their right to own a gun. It really is focused on the problem, which is 18 to 24-year-old males that go into schools and do these horrific things. So I think it's a good step. I think it's a really positive and sensible law, and it will get passed. Yeah,
well, fingers crossed. Some say it doesn't go far enough. The shooters in Texas and in New York in that that grocery store, they were 18 years old.
Right.
Yet the bill stops short of raising the age from 18 to. Why?
It does. Because then you're actually saying that people who follow the law and the other 99.9% who actually are law-abiding citizens would lose their right to access a firearm like that.
But why do they need it?
Well, that's a different story.
It is a different story.
But it's a constitutional right, and people feel, especially now with all the social unrest and the crime in the cities, people don't feel safe. So they feel like they need to protect themselves because the police and the courts are not protecting them. They're treating the criminals like victims, and the victims they don't really care about. So there is a perceived need for that. But more importantly, Juliana, the bill actually addresses the 18 to 21-year-old by making their records available. And prior to this law, anybody under 18, their records were sealed. So now they're going to make sure that criminal records or mental health issues that will have anything to do with gun ownership. In other words, if any of those records would prevent them from getting a weapon, they will be released. And so it's not meant to violate their privacy, and it's not going to mean that their records are going to be broadcast, but specifically directed at the children who have mental health issues. Most of these criminals have indicated their interest in massacring people and killing themselves, and it's always been telegraphed by the actual perpetrator. And so this law will make sure that those children or new adults will not have access to weapons.
Former VP Mike Pence, I think he had some choice words of the president didn't go down too well with Joe Biden supporters. He fell off his bike, didn't he? Poor him. I do hope he's feeling well. I wonder if somebody got fired.
I hope so. Yeah.
Actually, but midterms are fast approaching.
Right.
Now the president is talking about this fuel tax cut. Some people say it's just highly symbolic. It's not really going to do anything. A desperate man trying to claw back support before the midterms.
Yes on all.
You agree?
It's a complete gimmick. And first of all, it won't work.
Why?
Because it's 18 cents when gasoline now is over $5 a gallon. It's over $6 in California. So it's a rounding error. It's not charged at the pump. It's charged at the wholesale level or at the producer level. Right. So it will take a while for that to be passed through. And, you know, another $5 increase in oil prices will make that completely insignificant. So it really is a gimmick. It's a vote-getter gimmick. It's temporary, which doesn't change behavior. It's only for 3 months, coincidentally, leading into the midterms. It's the summer driving season. Even Democrats are against it. Nancy Pelosi, the speaker, has recently criticized it. Yes. It is a complete and utter gimmick. And meanwhile, at the same time, he's assaulting the domestic energy industry. So he and Jake Sullivan were begging Putin to pump more oil last fall. Now they're begging the Saudis. He's heading to Riyadh to beg them to pump more. The mullahs in Iran, the Venezuelans. Meanwhile, we have complete ability to be energy independent, and we were 2 years ago. Energy independent, the world's leading producer of energy. And we could be back to that, but we're producing less. And he and his administration have put their foot on the neck of the refiners that actually convert the oil into gasoline. They are being really pressured in by every measure. So he's trying to crush the energy industry and bring up the price of energy. The question is he doing it on purpose? And is this all kind of a head fake, trying to be sympathetic with working people who are suffering from inflation? I'm not sure. But either way, it's a complete failure.
It's always a pleasure speaking with you.
Great
Rex
to be
Wilson,
here, Juliana.
Founding partner of Brigg McAdam. Lovely to have you in the studio. Thanks.
Always.
Now to our final topic. More than 3,000 workers at 70 UK firms have begun a 4-day working week with no reduction to pay. The pilot project will run for 6 months. Similar experiments have taken place elsewhere in the world with positive results. But is it economically feasible in the long run? Let's ask Charlotte Lockhart, the founder and CEO of 4-Day Week Global. She joins me from the capital. Charlotte Lockhart, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global today. So this 4-day working week trial has begun across the UK. Do you have any early insights on how that's panning out or a forecast?
Well, I mean, our forecast, of course, is that it's going to be a screaming success. No, they only started at the beginning of the month, so everybody is leveraging into it. However, one of our companies that was only putting 1,000 of their employees on is actually now putting 5,000 of their employees on. So I think that that's a pretty encouraging sign. We have had some midterm results out of our US pilot from one of the larger international companies that is on the pilot, and all of their statistics are pointing exactly in the direction we would be expecting around employee engagement and mental health, productivity uptake, and environmental benefits, and all of the measures that we are starting to measure.
Exactly, and those are really important measures. You know, it's been a pretty torrid couple of years, to put it lightly. So I think there is absolutely so many reasons as to why this should be going ahead. But there is still some anxiety. And can you understand that there are some employers that just simply, quite frankly, don't trust their staff, or they just want to see them visibly, physically in the office to know that they're working? How do you try to alleviate some of that anxiety when you're trying to bring on new clients?
Well, so the interesting thing about this, of course, is that that was the question that we were all asking ourselves prior to the pandemic. And then we had a pandemic and everybody went home to do their work. And bosses learned to trust their employees. And I have to say, if you're a boss who still doesn't trust their employees after having had the pandemic and your employees working for you through that, if you haven't developed the systems to trust them through that, then you're probably the wrong person for our program anyway. And so we acknowledge that as with any big change, whether it be a big business initiative, social change, that there are always going to be early adopters, and then there are going to be people who come in the middle, and then there'll be the stragglers who will come in the end. And we're in the early adopters stage with this. The companies, and there are thousands of them around the world that have already instituted this, particularly here in the UK. So they are the early adopters. They are the ones that are going, yep, I can see how I can close my business for a day. I'm going to do a 4-day week. Where we're shifting to, we're still in the early adoption stage, but we're shifting to businesses realizing that actually what we're talking about is reducing work time. So it might actually be that you are 5 days a week, but just reducing the time on those 5 days. And so when businesses work out that the benefits that they will get from focusing on their productivity and realizing that their employees' mental health is really important, then they start to work out, well, what is the way that we can reduce work time without reducing pay?
Absolutely. Well, Charlotte, like I said, it was definitely going to invite you into our team meetings. But if you can't do that, at least you can come down to the studio and we can discuss how this trial panned out when it comes to an end. Charlotte Lockhart, founder and CEO of the 4-Day Week Global. What a pleasure speaking with you on Channels Business Global today. Thanks, Charlotte. Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today. But as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.